Good evening. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are so very excited to be here with two of our favorite people, but in celebration of one of our most favorite people, Crystal Wilkinson. And we are really honored always to have Tayari Jones in the house as an interlocutor, interviewer, and lover of books. But we're especially excited to have y'all in conversation together for Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, stories and recipes from 5 generations of Black country cooks. This book is truly a labor of love. It's something that, for those of us who are fans of Crystal's work, we have been waiting for this book. We've been following essays online, seeing little teasers about it, hearing about it. And so to see it come to fruition in this beautiful package is really exciting. So if you are a longtime fan of Crystal's, you are as excited about this as we are. If you are brand new or if you're here with a friend, welcome. I will introduce Tayari first. So New York Times bestselling author Tayari Jones is the author of 4 novels, most recently An American Marriage, published in 2018. An American Marriage is an Oprah's Book Club selection and also appeared on Barack Obama's summer reading list, as well as his year-end roundup. The novel was awarded the Women's Prize for Fiction, formerly known as the Orange Prize, Aspen's Words Prize, and an NAACP Image Award. It has been published in 24 countries. Jones, a 2021 Guggenheim Fellow, has also been a recipient of the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, United States Artist Fellowship, NEA Fellowship, and Radcliffe Institute Bunting Fellowship. Her 3rd novel, Silver Sparrow, was added to the NEA Big Read Library of Classics in 2016. It's so good, though. We hold it down in Atlanta with Tayari Jones, and we're very grateful. But like I said, the woman of the hour is Crystal Wilkinson, who is a recent fellowship recipient of the Academy of American Poets. She's the award-winning author of Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, which we are celebrating tonight, as well as Perfect Black, a collection of poems, which you can go back and watch the replay of on our YouTube channel when we celebrated that, and 3 works of fiction, including The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries. She is the recipient of an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, an O. Henry Prize, a USA Artist Fellowship, and an Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. She has received recognition from the Yaddo Foundation, Hedgebrook, the Vermont Studio Center for the Arts, the Hermitage Foundation, and others. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, most recently including in The Atlantic, the Kenyon Review, Story, Agent Literary Journal, Emergence, Oxford American, and Southern Cultures. She was Poet Laureate of Kentucky from 2021 to 2023, and she currently teaches creative writing at the University of Kentucky, where she is a Bush Holbrook Endowed Professor. So please put your hands together for our lovely conversation partners. And know that you will have a chance to ask questions. If you're in the room with us, I will bring a microphone to you so that our online folks can hear. We got a great big online crowd with us. And if you are online, put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will vocalize those so the folks here can hear you. But without further ado, please welcome Tayari Jones and Crystal Wilkinson.
Well, we want to start off by thanking you all for coming. I'm so delighted that Crystal is here in our city, Atlanta. She's got a huge tour. She's going all over the country, but she came here to Atlanta because we are the best city.
It's true.
I've known Crystal a long time. I think we met in 2002, maybe, or 2001. We were both getting started as writers, and Crystal has written novels, she's written poetry, she's written essays, and now she's written Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, which is something entirely different. I want to say, I kind of feel the need to say it's a cookbook because they're recipes, but it's not really a cookbook. There's a lot of reflections, which makes me feel like it is memoir. Mm-hmm. But also there are parts of it that I am tempted to call fiction. Mm-hmm. Explain to us, what is this wonderful thing I'm holding in my hand?
Well, it's all of those things. And I think it began with actually, I was writing The Birds of Opulence, and I decided that my fiction self, my poet self, and my essayist self did not live in separate houses, that they all resided in one body, and they were tools that I could pull out and use. And so, I poured the whole bucket of those tools into this book. But I also think that I had to use my imagination and intuition to create my fourth great grandmother, Aggie, because she was an enslaved woman. She was called Aggie of Color. And, there are many, many Aggies. And so being able to conjure a voice for her through the tool of fiction and to try to imagine what her life was like um, is sort of the foundation of those parts that are written in fiction. But, when I was working with my editor, Francis Lamb, who does the Splendid Table. Many of you all know who he is, but he does cookbooks and does lots of food books. And he kept saying cookbook, and I kept saying no. He kept saying cookbook, and I was like, no. And finally, he said, "Let's call this a culinary memoir." And I said, okay, let's do that.
Well, here's another question. This is another fundamental question about this book. The book is called Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts. What is a kitchen ghost, and do we all have them? I don't think I have one.
You do. You just don't know yet. So kitchen ghost was a term that I came to when my grandmother died, and my grandmother Christine died in 94. And I always love when I have family. So I have two family members here tonight who knew my grandmother. And so when she died, she usually cooked these huge meals, like for 30 people. And I often helped her, as did the other grandchildren, as did my mother and her sisters. And so here I was, 30 something, and trying to prepare this meal after she died, because the cousins, we all decided that we would do something intimately at our own houses. And so I was in the kitchen nervous about preparing such a large holiday meal by myself for the first time. And I remember that I had my grandmother's dress. So I went into the bedroom, grabbed her dress, and brought her dress in and put it on the back door. And then suddenly I felt as if she was there, and that she was sort of whispering, saying, "Come on, girl. You can do this. Don't put too much salt in that. Make sure you check. Did you check the turkey?" And so that's where the term came from. And I began to use it in poetry and in fiction, but I'd never used it or thought about me putting my finger right on the pulse of that and writing about it directly. But yes, I think we all have kitchen ghosts. Maybe even if you didn't have a mother who cooked, you certainly had a grandmother who cooked, or a great grandmother who cooked. And I see food as sort of a conduit through culture, through geography, through history.
I was going to ask you why food as the inheritance, because we inherit a great many things, from our ancestors, from our mothers, from our grandmothers. What is it about food that feels so present for you?
I think food is culture. Food. It's quite. Look at me. It's obvious that food is important. But I think for me, it's culture. And many of the times I saw the kitchen as a place of empowerment in my household.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah. Of course, my grandmother came through a time where men were in charge. My grandfather was responsible for the fields and the cows. And, he was a deacon in the church, and he had a sort of a sense of power. But her power was making sure that everyone was fed. Now, you could think of that as being subservient, but I think that she saw it as as power. And the kitchen was the center of the universe, right? So we got our hair pressed in the kitchen. We heard the gossip in the kitchen. We found out that if somebody was getting married, or somebody was being loved up on, or somebody was getting a divorce. So it was kind of the center of the universe in our house.
Is the kitchen the center of the universe in your house?
Some days. It really is. I mean, I have, as a feminist, I had kind of gone back and forth with that. Like, why do I cook so much? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing as a woman of power in the 2000s? But my husband does all the cleaning. He does all those other things. And I found great joy in cooking.
Now, when you were writing this book and including the recipes, now, did you have these recipes in written form, or did you have to write them from memory? Like, how did the recipes go? How did these dishes go from on your plates to in this book?
Well, many of them started, like you'll see inside the book a photograph of it, but I everybody always says you were 12, but I was about 12 or 13, and the story behind that is that I ended up graduating from high school early, so I was like a 12 or 13-year-old freshman, and I had home ec class, and so I brought home this recipe box, and there's a photograph of it in here that's all rusted now, and I had to fill it up. And so I knew she wouldn't do it. So rather than saying, Granny, give me the recipe for this or that, I would say, how do you make such and such? How do you make biscuits? And she would say, well, first reach down there. You're going to make some, reach down there and get you a bowl, get that white bowl, pull that out. Next, you're going to do this. What you'll need is it. So they were oral. And I think of recipes as poems. I think they're both like oral, at least they were in my home, oral and oral, like you have to listen. And so many of the recipes in the book were translated. So they were in that box, translated as part of a storytelling tradition from my grandmother. And then I had a recipe tester, Bonnie Benwick, who worked for many years for the Washington Post, was my recipe tester. And it was funny because she would call me and say, or email me, Crystal, this cake, is there really a cake that takes 3 hours to make? And I would think, oh yeah, in the 80s, Granny's stove was going out. So it would take longer. And so she did all the proper testing and turned them into she tested them out to make sure that they were cookable.
That's so interesting. And they are cookable. I cooked them. I cooked some of the recipes because I just wanted to try it out. I mean, I'm not an official recipe tester, but I did. I'm just a regular person, and I tested these recipes in my regular kitchen with my regular skills, and the biscuits come out just like this. Yes. We were at a restaurant today, and I said, I feel like you're a aficionado. What do you think about those biscuits? She looked at it. She said, I can tell from all the way over here, they dry. But because of the kind of person she is, she tried it anyway. And she said, it's not as bad as it looks. Because she is a polite person. Now, it's so interesting. This is subtitled. It says 5 generations of country cooks. And when I think biscuits, etc., I think Southern, right? But you are from Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And that is is it a distinct identity from Southern identity? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is distinct in many ways. There are lots of commonalities, but a lot of it depended on the terrain. Like the weather is so different in Appalachia, where we're from, than the deep South. So instead of like doing barbecued pork, we had to think about it's going to be a long winter. So how are we going to preserve this? So a lot of Appalachian cooking relies on preservation. So my grandfather would salt the pork, or he would hang up the hams and salt and cure them so that you would have something all winter. When they grew potatoes, it was my job as a little girl to take the potatoes with the dirt still on them into the attic and spread them out so they wouldn't touch and rot, so that you could have potatoes all winter. And, about March, right before it was time to start planting and go over again, those potatoes would be still good, still cookable, but they would start to shrivel. So this idea of preservation, I think, is one, because of the terrain, because of the geography, makes Southern cooking different than Appalachian cooking.
Now, one of the things I hear you talk about in your interviews is that people think there are no Black people in Appalachia.
Yeah, over 2 million Black people in Appalachia. Somebody said, what? And we've always been there. My family, our family, since I have family members here, have been in those hills for over 200 years. So, when sometimes people say, why do you even call yourself an Appalachian? That's a white term, it's white people. And I'm like, it's ours, right, Alan? It's ours as much as it is anybody else's if our family's been there that long. So, yeah, there's definitely Black folk in those hills, and always have been.
Of all the recipes in this book, the one that really, well, there are many, but my mama is from Oklahoma, and the blackberry jam cake, I guess that is a recipe of my own kitchen ghost, that my grandmother would make it, and my mother makes a blackberry jam cake. She makes it on Thanksgiving night to be eaten on Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never known anyone else to even mention a blackberry jam cake until I read about it in your work, and I felt connected in a way, and that I had not thought about before. I had not considered that blackberry jam cake to be an inheritance. And when I read about the blackberry desserts in your book, it reminded me of your first work of fiction, Blackberries, Blackberries.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel as a person who's most known for your award-winning novels writing in this different form?
In some ways it feels the same. I always, the whole time we were doing this, and Frances would say, I think we have something special, or they would do something grand that never happened with my books. And, I've never been in the New York Times until a couple weeks ago, but my novels didn't put me there. And I always say, my fiction is very jealous. Like my novels and short stories are going, what is going on? Why didn't we get this? So I do think about that. But for the most part, it feels the same. It's words. It's trying to come up on the perfect structure and the perfect order. The way to tell the story, like what part of it to hold up to the light, what part not to. And for me, it's mostly the same. Even though I think emotionally it's very different. Like I've never cried so much, because as a fiction writer, what I usually do is in much of my fiction, there's a thread of truth, but it's a little tiny thread. And it's like, and I got such a big thrill as a fiction writer to say, nobody knows that this is true. And I could just put something in and then pile fiction on top of it. Whereas, except for the Aggie parts of like having the whole truth on the page was very emotional.
For people who haven't read it yet, can you walk us through the 5 generations of cooks in this book? So it starts Aggie.
So Aggie was born in 1795 in Virginia, likely as an enslaved child. She came to Kentucky as Kentucky was being separated and formed in around the early 1800s. And so she's the first one. And then it moves through. The woman on the cover is actually Aggie's daughter, who was a famous businesswoman in the town that I'm from, and her name is Patsy Rife. Even now, the county I'm from is 99.5% white, but they're still a Patsy Rife Ridge. That's how much ingrained in the founding of that she is. So she's in there. And the other ancestors, I kind of skip around, but mostly next is Ma Lily, who was my grandmother's mother. And then it goes to me. It sort of skips my mother because my mother was not a cook. She could make some mean salmon croquettes. That's it. That's all she could cook. So I don't know if that was 5, but those are the generations. I do speak briefly about Grandma Lizzie, who was Ma Lily's mama. So, but mainly it starts with Aggie and moves forth.
How did you do the research?
The research part of it is kind of what got me, because I knew about Aggie. I mean, I knew about Patsy Rife, and my grandmother would always say something like, "Oh yeah, Patsy Rife's somewhere kin to us." And then I also grew up with this history where I would see information about Patsy Rife, and it would say that her father was a well-known white businessman and her mother was a slave. And then when I began to do this genealogical research, I found out that Aggie was Patsy Rife's mother, and she had never been named, and that she was named Aggie of color in a court document. So I did a lot of online research. I actually went to my hometown. I think they wondered what I was doing because I marched into the courthouse and said, "Where can I find?" And they have these documents that should be, I think, in a museum or protected in some ways. They've got these huge plats that are still covered in velvet. These huge books that were so heavy that I had to like really heft up to carry one over to the table to look at. And that was a daunting experience to sort of open this big book up and know that Aggie and Tarleton were on a particular page, and then just to go and touch it. Like they didn't write that, but to see their names with the original ink from the 1800s still there, and to be able to touch that. So there was that research. And then I talk about slavery in general and use slavery as a timeline to follow my own ancestry through. And of course, that's research that I had to do. I had to read a lot of books about enslavement.
Have you passed your recipes on to your daughters?
I have. Some of them they have taken on. There's a section in the book that's so funny. Like there, when we were trying to make Thanksgiving for in the middle of COVID. And so we did it all by Zoom. And so you have all these personalities. My son is like cussing, saying, "This is not a holiday. Why are we doing it this way?" And my girls were like, "What in the world? Is this how you do this, Mama? Like, why? My feet hurt. My back's hurting. Like, why?" And so I have passed it on, and I went through sort of both a like, "Y'all go" period when they said, "I'm not doing this." And then I also was like, "Oh, but you're not." But it's like I left it up to them. I didn't try to push them either way. And so beyond the book, this year, my daughter and her fiance, they made Thanksgiving, and we all went over there. And she'll probably watch this and know it, but she didn't know that I secretly made another Thanksgiving dinner at home, just in case it didn't go well. But it did. They did a great job.
See, that's love. That's love. She said, "Mama, I'll do it. You don't have to bother." And you're like, "I'm bothering." That's like a parachute. It's like a food parachute. Now, I almost forgot. How'd y'all let me forget to ask her to read? What are we thinking? Would you be kind enough to read, please, from the bread section?
Yeah,
the bread chapter is my favorite because, I love bread.
I'll just read a little bit. What these women know about bread. There is cornbread in my blood. I can make it in my sleep, but it's hard to give someone else instructions unless they are standing right beside me in the kitchen. Ron called me recently while I was away for a writing conference and asked me for my cornbread recipe. I hesitated, got a little angry that someone who's actually cohabitated for me for almost 15 years wouldn't know how to make cornbread. But then I remembered he's from Louisville, a city boy. Didn't your mama make cornbread? I asked him. He named 2 box cornbread mixes that taste like cake, though I'm sure Miss Helen made a fine skillet of cornbread in her day. She's in her 90s now and no longer cooks, but she's a country woman too, born and raised on the Tennessee border down in Franklin, Kentucky. Never mind, I told him, just use the directions on the cornmeal sack. Come to my kitchen and we'll make cornbread all day. But every time someone asks me for the recipe, I flounder. I have to think about it. I want to say, just let me make it for you. But I was too far away to make cornbread for him. In the end, he decided to remain without cornbread until I got back home. The last time one of my daughters asked me how to make cornbread, I made her get on a video call so I could see what we were working with. What are you fixing it with? I asked. She didn't think it mattered. She grew silent. I could tell she was a little perturbed with me. She thought I was clutching some ancient family recipe and not wanting to give it to her, but the truth was I needed to see her ingredients in order to tell her what she'd need. Cornbread with a tablespoon of sugar added goes better with soup beans. You need a more dense cornbread for dressing. Hot water cornbread is the better companion for cabbage. I wanted us to be shoulder to shoulder with our aprons on so I could show her like Granny showed me. She needed to hear my voice, and I needed my eye on her so she could get it right. I told her she needed self-rising cornmeal, milk, eggs, and oil for the skillet. She seemed surprised at the short list. Are you sure? She said. I assured her that that was all she needed. She shrugged her shoulders like, here goes nothing. And so she did actually make it, and she held it up to the camera, and she did a great job. And I don't know how much time. Do I have a little bit?
Come on, we want some more. We want
Okay.
some more.
So after she makes it, I say, I don't think I'd be wrong if I said that my family's love of bread began with ash cakes cooked in an open fire outside a cabin in Kentucky in the 1800s. Though it's conjured by my imagination, I can see Grandma Aggie by the fire, taking the rations of cornmeal, adding boiling water and salt, shaping the stiff batter into ash cakes so there'd be bread. There's always been bread. Grandma Aggie presents herself across 200 years of bread making in our family. She manifests before me from 1810, shows her used to be to my own now. She says, come Saturday when you get your rations, they'll all be hungry. The women will stand around holding their hurting backs. The men folk will sit on the ground or on turned up buckets, rest their elbows on their knees. You're tired down clean to the bones in your feet, but these children, the old people too, got to eat. While the cow peas is cooking in the big pot with that little piece of salt pork over the fire, take you out enough cornmeal to make a bread for everyone. Don't use it all now. Save enough for mush through the week. When the coals get to blazing, take you a large heaping of that cornmeal, depends on how many mouths you're trying to feed, and mix in a little salt and just enough boiling water that your spoon stands up straight in that batter like a proud man. Use your hands and work up the dough, shape your dough up in cakes. Now wrap you some wet leaves. You can use greens, can even use oak leaves around each one of them cakes. Then set your cakes up on them hot ashes in the fire. Don't have no leaves? Just put them cakes on the ashes. They'll be just fine. When it gets to smelling good and mixes up with the smell of them peas, everybody will come out and stand around waiting with their tin plates. Some of them will eat straight from the pot with their homemade spoons or even out of the palms of their hands. They won't be on you worrying about when it's ready, but you'll see the tremble in their eyes, hear their stomachs talking back instead of their voice boxes. When the food's ready, you send somebody back in the kitchen to fetch Judah so she can eat. You put a good dab of them peas on the plate and serve up an ash cake for everybody. Now that's good eating. Old Duval, the overseer, will be there too now and again, walking, looking to make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be. But on Saturday nights, we don't pay him too much mind. He'll get some whiskey in him soon enough and go on and go to bed. By the time everybody's done eating, the moon will be winking at you from the sky. Them bullfrogs will be singing down at the creek. That old hoot owl will commence to talking to his gal. But you'll sit a while and enjoy them sounds all around you. The stars might come out and bless the world. Old Tap might pull out his fiddle, and his music is so sweet you'd put it up against any song by any bird in them oak trees. You look up at the house up yonder and think about the cooking, the cleaning, the mending, the polishing, all the women's work and the men's work too. Coming after a little pause for the Lord's Day. You'll take in a big gulp of that night air way down in your belly. You'll see the curtain flutter just a little up there where Mars Talton lays his head. Little Suze comes over to you with her fingers stuck in her mouth, her pretty eyes wide. You know the child's still hungry, so you take that last ash cake from your dress pocket. She scampers off with a wide grin on her face and shares it with two more young'uns about her age. You look up and here comes Molly with a skirt full of persimmons and her sweetie Luke struggling against the weight of the deer meat he carries across his shoulder. You'll suck your teeth and say, Lord, y'all done brought us more work to do. But then you'll grin and take them both in your arms as if they were your own. You'll feel your muscles loosen just a little when you realize tomorrow's Sunday, and what a time you'll all have when Sunday supper comes.
I just want to sit with it for a moment. So beautiful. I mean, that is the word. It is beautiful. I think that we all came to this book expecting to learn a lot, expecting to give some helpful hints on how to make our favorite desserts. But I think people may come for the recipes, but we stay for the beauty.
Mm.
I think that this book has all the artistry. I feel like this is a culmination of your 23 years since you published your first book.
Mm-hmm. 2024 years now.
And it's all kind of come to this. Now, this is a kind of a frivolous question, but how does it feel? I saw you in the New York Times. You see the picture of her in the New York Times. I saw you in the New York Times. I saw you standing room only in Brooklyn. I hear you on the radio, on NPR, everywhere. I tried to have breakfast with her this morning, but she had an interview with the people in England. So sorry. How does it feel to be an international superstar?
I'm still little Chrissy from the creek in many ways, but it's not. It's interesting when people say you're an overnight success when you've been working at it hard for 30 years. So there's certainly that part too. It's been hard work, but I'm proud of where we're at right now, and I think my grandparents and all the other people would be proud too.
I was imagining the woman in this photo here. What would she think? But then I was like looking at that dress she had on. She looks like she's like, well, of course.
Yeah, I think Aggie was, she was definitely the ditty, as my grandmother would say. She had it going on for her time period.
It's just, I don't know, when I think about, especially, this, I said we are getting our Black History Month kicked off properly today with this book. And I just love the layers and textures of the story, right? Like just the range of experiences that these recipes are testament to a range of experience. Like you say, some of them are made with just a few ingredients to stretch a meal farther, but others of them are like downright indulgent.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, of course, that was another thing Bonnie called and was like, there's a lot of sugar in this cobbler. I said, you better put all that sugar in that cobbler. It needs to be there. It needs to be there. But it does represent a range of experiences because there is my grandmother's recipe. There is my struggle being a vegetarian for 20 years and craving my down home recipes then. So you get a little flavor of that in the book. There is owning a bookstore and a cafe for 8 years, and some of the recipes that we that we had inside the store. Um, they're they're in there, and celebrations, what we had at celebrations. So there's a range, and I think that that's one of the things that makes it a memoir. Like starting with um, Aggie, with Grandma Aggie, and then moving forward.
I'm so glad that we got to talk about all the range in this book because, I do feel that if you have one recipe in something, it becomes a cookbook. Have you noticed that? But this book is so much, I don't want to say more, but it's so big. It's such a big book. It's such a big book. When I held it in my hand, I was surprised by how slim it is because I had read it in the electronic form. And I just felt that I had just consumed something huge that I was expecting it to be a big doorstop of a book because of how much it contains and the density of it. I want to open it up to questions. So, because I could talk to you all night, but I want to give other people a chance to talk. If not, I will continue.
So if you're in the room, raise your hand. Yes, okay. I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you for that. I really want you to elaborate on how you started, how you said you brought all your tools to bear. What is it about being a writer that makes you think you have to segment, as a poet, as an essayist, as a short story writer?
Well, I don't think anyone's necessarily told me that, but there's an expectation that when you come to the page and you're talking about something, that you choose one of those forms in which to write. That you make a choice, like, oh, this is an essay. I sometimes miss the early parts of my writing career when I wasn't working on a project and I would have an idea or a memory about something and I didn't know. I would free write and then I would decide, like, oh, maybe this is a poem. Oh, this is a short story. Oh, this is, nonfiction. And I think it's a form of risk taking to do something with form in this way. And not just in the doing it, but trying to come up with craft that makes it work. And I tell my students all the time that it's all about balance and control. Like a reader will almost read anything if they feel like that there's balance and that there's control and that it's not an accident. And so that's what I worked really hard on. Sort of the rhythm of like, okay, here's Aggie's voice coming again. She's gonna, and it's empowering for her to be able to tell her own story because it's not just Aggie, my family member. It is countless thousands of unnamed Black women who came through that experience. So it's my ancestor, but not just my ancestor. So that's why I thought it was important. There was no other way to access it. I can't follow my genealogy back because there were no records for women. There were particularly no records for Black women. And the records stop with her. When Tarleton dies, it stops. There's nothing after that either. There's nothing before him, and there's nothing after him. But she had a life before him and after him, and so I felt like I had the tool, fiction, to be able to do that in.
I think your book is amazing. I just was able to just peruse it. It feels like it's partly a memoir, your personal story, and back generation, but it's also historical.
Yes.
For as you were saying, and I really felt that's why I felt connected. And looking at this and looking at some of the photos of your family, and I said, oh, it kind of looks like my uncle, or it could be, and so it just seems to me this book is going to be a lot deeper than not just a cookbook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the intention, and it's also intended to go beyond my direct family, so I hope that somebody will see a picture of my grandfather and make them think of their own people.
Thank you so much for this book. I haven't had an opportunity to read it, but I'm perusing through it as well. And you've just burst my bubble. I just assumed that all fiddleheads were only in Massachusetts, but I see you have a recipe there on making fiddleheads. So my question to you would be then, do you recall some element of recipes that weren't indigenous to your region that you might have shared, or your ancestors shared with you, that you have now put into your family recipe box, if you will?
That weren't indigenous to the region?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're all sort of a melting pot, because I mean, there are certain things that, like when my children were growing up, I think part of it was generational, but I would, they would say, they'd say, their friends would say, what did you have to eat? And they would say rhubarb. And their friends would go, what? What is that? What is rhubarb? So I think there are some things, like, I mean, there's a recipe in here for scrambled tofu. My grandmother did not make scrambled tofu. She didn't make tofu scramble. Yeah. She also did not make the sorghum lattes. There's a sorghum latte recipe in here.
My grandmother also would never make scrambled tofu. She would probably cry. Was there a particular part of this book that was like difficult for you to write, as it like related to your own personal history?
I mean, I think it's all I've never cried so much in my life, and often cry at these events, because it's all so personal, and part of it is because of the grief, because everybody's gone. My grandmother's gone, my mother's gone. Of course, those furthest ancestors have been gone for a while, but and grief is a through line, a storyline through the book, and I sort of work my way through grief, and that's another reason why the kitchen. It's mostly in the kitchen. The way that memory works, it can be a sliver of light that comes through the kitchen window, because that's where my grandmother was most of the time, and where the light might hit the sink, and I'm suddenly compelled back. And so I find that all those things have been, it's been a healing experience to write. I hope it's a healing experience for some people to read as well.
Thank you for being here. My question is, what is the best recipe that didn't make it into the book?
There are lots of recipes that didn't make it. So there are lots of recipes for yeast rolls, depending on my grandmother's whim, which one she wanted to use. And I don't have a recipe in here for yeast rolls. Look, I'm looking, because the book is new to me too. Yeah, so that's probably one, the yeast rolls. And I had so many different blackberry recipes that I think Frances was finally like, well, you've got the blackberry covered. So some of them didn't make it in there too.
Did the yeast rolls just not make the cut because they weren't good enough, or what was?
think
Because I
they're
love
just-
yeast rolls, so I would just want to.
There's so many versions of them. My grandmother had refrigerator yeast rolls and quick yeast rolls and yeast rolls that took several hours to make. And when I make my yeast rolls, I just really do a combination of all of them. And I couldn't figure out like the perfect recipe, everybody would have to be in the kitchen with me when I was doing it to figure out what that recipe would have been. That would have been an amalgam of all of them.
I have never successfully made yeast rolls.
No,
No.
it's hard.
Yeah. Can you come over to my house?
Yes. Yes.
We do.
And Tayari's a mean cook. She's acting like she don't know what she's doing.
She
but
can't make yeast rolls.
I have seen.
It is an ongoing source of humiliation. It is a seasonal humiliation.
But your cakes make up for it. I've seen your cakes. I've tasted your desserts, so don't play.
We have some online questions. One is, because of the intimacy of food and identity, how do you navigate the truth with such an intimate matter?
I mean, I think that as a writer, I make that decision every time. Like, I'm not thinking about until after I've written it, who will read it. Like, I have to bend it all every time. So I don't really think about that. I don't think about the intimacy of it. Even now, when I go around and somebody says something about my grandmother, I'm like, hey, how do you know about my grandmother? And they're like, well, I read your book. I don't say that, but that's the kind of what goes through my head, because I think you have to spend it all on the page. Like, if you flinch, then you're missing something. And so that's something that I have experienced for a long time. So I don't have a problem going to what Robert Olin Butler calls the white hot center. Like, I don't have a problem of jumping in there. And then I worry about later, like, what that's going to be like once I've made these words and they're intimate words, and I'm, having them, giving them to the world.
Zawadi asks, what is your earliest memory of food?
I think standing on the chair. I said the other night that I probably CPS would have been called, because I was all on top of on top of the stove with my grandmother, practically, like standing in a chair, tiptoe, constantly trying to see. There was something about, I could see her stirring, but I really wanted to see in the pot and tiptoeing, and she never stopped me. And it's like, here, things are boiling and all kinds of stuff's going on, and I'm trying to see in the pot. But that's one of my earliest, standing on tiptoe, trying to see how it was done.
Can you speak more to the specific character of Black Appalachian food?
I wonder, I'd have to have a conversation with that person to know exactly what they're getting at. Like, people want like these lines drawn, and I don't think that there are any, really. They're not these like concrete lines. Like, I think that Black Appalachian food lines up in many ways with white Appalachian food, but then the nuances are in religion, the way that religion was enacted, even though that we had some of the same traditions, and that sort of communal aspect of food, which also white Appalachia had. But I think that, Alan, I remember basket meetings being a huge, important part of our lives, and that's how we learned how to socialize with people. That's how we learned sort of a communal values, what it means to be part of a community, even being surrounded by white folks. Like, we learned, me and my two cousins, Loretta and Tracy, were the only Black kids from Head Start all the way through high school. But when we went to church, and it wasn't just the church itself, the religion part, but the communal aspect of it, of having relatives and people who weren't relatives come to visit, have dinner on the grounds, or some people call it dinner on the grounds, but these basket meetings where people would drive up and in buses, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. And that's where we learned sort of our history as Black folks, and learned how to be in community with people. You know, it probably didn't sit well with the older people, but many of us went to those basket meetings and never went inside the church. Did you go into the church, Alan? No. We roamed the grounds and socialized and ate food and requested certain food by certain people.
One more is from Natalie from the Sea Island Retreat in 2022.
Hey, Natalie.
She says, "What do you like to eat and drink and snack on while you write?"
I'm in my popcorn phase. Yeah, so popcorn, not just plain popcorn, but experimental things like nutritional yeast. Yeah, that's a thing. But you know, garlic preparations like garlic powder or garlic salt or things that I've made myself, spices to put on popcorn.
A classic. You don't look like you like nutritional yeast, Tayari.
No, I'm like, but I don't stop anyone else from, if you get down with nutritional yeast, I do like the way that you have expanded our traditions and updated them, because I think that by expanding the traditions, it's what'll keep them alive, right? Like to keep them from being a relic of the past. I have a question for you though. What do you think about people that will not share their recipes?
Well, I have gotten so many calls from family members, emails, angry, pass it throughs from other people. And my son said, "Mama, are you giving all Granny's secrets away? Giving away her secret recipes?" But the truth is that, like the jam cake, my grandmother had 4 versions of this jam cake. So which one is the secret one? Which one is the real one? And, and these are me trying to make, I can't make anything like my grandmother. So I haven't given away her secrets because I've got my own juice, but I don't have her juice. I don't have it. And the ingredients have changed.
That is true. And I also feel like that's how recipes die. Like when people hoard recipes, it's hoarding knowledge. And that's how traditions get lost. Like, do you hear all the time about someone passing away and they took their recipe with them? And so that is just lost. I don't know. Like I just wrote, I'm writing a novel, and I wrote, she's the kind of woman that wouldn't share her recipes. And I felt like that told you everything you need to know about that person. I share any recipes that I have because they'll be gone forever. They'll just become apocryphal. People like, oh, I remember that pound cake, and it'll just exist, in the imagination of my neighbor. My neighbor's right here, but it won't be passed on.
Yeah. And I agree. And I agree that it's going to morph and change into something else. And I, since I started this tour, I've been in tears just hearing people say, "Oh, I wish I could taste my mama's banana pudding, but she never would give me the recipe." And, there's story after story after story about a recipe that was never written down, or somebody wouldn't give anybody the recipe. And so now nobody in the family can make it. And
I'm going to argue that those people that will not share their recipe, I bet they have all kinds of crazy secrets in their families. Like, if you can't tell somebody how to make a yeast roll, you are definitely not going to tell them who their daddy really is. But I digress.
You're probably right. You are probably right.
I don't see how we're going to top that. So,
well, I do have one more thing to say before we adjourn. Do it. And Crystal was saying how she owned the bookstore for many years. Of course, I want everyone to buy at least one copy of this book, and I want you to buy it right here at our local independent bookstore.
That's right.
This bookstore has been, it's the longest continuously open feminist bookstore in the country. In the world, you say? Why not?
In the world.
Well, Atlanta is the world, but yes. My very first bookstore reading was here when I was just a little puppy. I didn't know anyone, had never heard, I didn't have any connections, didn't know how a person went about having bookstore readings or what to expect. And this store was like the gold standard. I'm so happy that the first place I ever went was here, because it means I started my career in a space that treated writers, women writers, writers of color with respect. And I came to expect that because I learned it here. And so I want this place to be open another 50 years. How many years y'all got?
We are turning 50 this November.
That's what I thought. Yes. So buy your books, plural. Buy them here.
Thank you. And Tayari's books are up front.
Thank
In the
you,
event that you
Tayari.
have somehow missed her books,
Okay.
you can get them up front. And everyone is invited to our 50th birthday. Save the date, November 2nd. That's going to be our grown and sexy birthday party.
Oh, this store is a Scorpio?
Yes.
Grown and
Very
sexy.
Scorpio.
And
So-
Crystal is happy to sign everybody's
Yes.
books.
I am.
So y'all
I'm
are going
happy
to
to
stay where you are.
We'll
I'm going
stay
to bring
here.
you the pins and everything. If folks already have their book, actually pins are right there.
Okay.
I'm going to bring you a table though. And if you already have your book, you can just make a line. If you need to get books, they are up front with Stacia. Thank you all so much. And thanks to all our virtual folks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.
The one. I'll find it.